Okay, we can start admitting people.
The Trump organization has been found guilty of fraud.
Okay, welcome everyone. We're going to wait a couple of minutes to give people time to join the room, and we will start at 4:05 sharp. Thank you for tuning in tonight. Welcome everyone. Tonight we're presenting Books Revisited, a conversation with Oliver Chanarin. I'm Camilo Otero, Artist Programs Manager at Center for Book Arts. This program is part of the exhibition Books Revisited, curated by Taylor Fisch. Before we start, I'd like to acknowledge CBA is on the ancestral unceded territory of the Lenape people. This event is being live streamed to our YouTube channel and will be available on the platform afterwards. Center for Book Arts is the oldest nonprofit dedicated to uplift the book arts through exhibitions, educational programs, studio access, and artist residency program. Books Revisited, a conversation with Oliver Chanarin, is a two-part event. Taylor will give a curatorial walkthrough of the exhibition and then engage in a conversation with Oliver Chanarin, who participates in the show. Taylor Fisch is a curator of archives at Curimanzuto, Mexico City. From 2019 until 2021, she was curatorial assistant for the Hillman Photography Initiative at Carnegie Museum of Art, Pittsburgh. There, she worked on a three-part initiative, Mirror, with a memory, photography, surveillance, and artificial intelligence, which included the exhibition Trevor Paglen, Opposing Geometries, a podcast and a publication that received the Association of Art Museum Curators 2022 Award for Excellence. From 2017 to 2018, she was the 12-month Modern Women's Fund intern in the Department of Painting and Sculpture at the Museum of Modern Art in New York. She has contributed to several print publications, including What They Saw, historical photo books by women, 1843 to 1999, published by 10 by 10 Photo Books in 2021. which won the Paris Photo Aperture Foundation Catalog of the Year Award. Welcome, Taylor. You're muted.
Thank you, Camilo, for the kind introduction. And thank you to Karina, Zoe, Kazlan, and the rest of the team at Center for Book Arts for giving me the opportunity to work on this exhibition and to work with you. I would also like to thank all of the artists and lenders of the exhibition, and a special shout out to Yvonne Martinez for designing our beautiful catalog, which you can get on site at Center for Book Arts or on their website. I want to thank you all for being here. Just a reminder to put yourself on mute if possible, but we're happy to see your faces. As Camilo said, I'm going to start by walking through the exhibition, which Camilo has generously offered to video in real time. And then I'm going to introduce Oliver, who's one of the participating artists and who will join me in a conversation about his work. The idea for Books Revisited came about around 2 years ago when I was researching photo books from the 1980s for the recent 10 by 10 publication, What They Saw, Historical Photo Books by Women. And during that research, I came across two projects, one by Francesca Woodman, which you'll see here on the screen, and another one by Clarissa Sly, both of which are now on view in Books Revisited. And in Francesca Woodman's work, her artist book, her only artist book, Some Disordered Interior Geometries, she took a student's used geometry manual that she found at a bookstore in Rome, glued self-portraits on top of instructional diagrams and exercises. She also erased lines and added her own translations. And in this spread, you can see that she added her own drawings as well. The circle is on top of the triangle, which then mimics the circle that's in the photograph, and then the triangle shape that she's making with her own body. And then in the case of Clarissa Sly's 1989 piece, Reading Dick and Jane with Me, she reworks the educational tool known as the Dick and Jane Readers, which were used to teach children how to read through simple narrative text and watercolor illustrations that depicted mainly a white upper class suburban family. And so Sly creates her own version of the reader from the perspective of the children, who tell their own story about learning how to read from books that did not reflect their reality, growing up in a racially segregated blue-collar Black community in Virginia in the 1940s and the 1950s. So here Sly collages the text and images from the actual reader alongside childlike drawings and family photographs of children from her own community. So what I noticed in these works was a practice of artists using existing books as raw material to not only make works of art, but to challenge the authority of the verbal and the visual language of the books. For Woodman, that's authoring her own text and images to create and raise questions about how her own body struggles to prescribe to the geometry within the book. And then for Sly, that's more directly trying to dismantle and claim agency over the white patriarchal narratives. Woodman, Sly, and the other 9 artists and collectives on view in Books Revisited all present books as sites for the reinterpretation of text and images, the fluidity of authorship, and the insertion of new subjectivities that bring these new narratives into history. So the show begins, though, with a work from 1971 by the British conceptual artist John Latham, an artist who I identified as an early example of an artist who is using books within his work, mainly sculpture, but who's also using books to challenge the authority of the knowledge produced within them. So his Encyclopedia Britannica, which you can see Camilo showing on the screen, is a silent black and white stop frame animation film where Latham swishes the 32-volume set of the encyclopedia, which is generally considered a finite authority of knowledge, into a 6-minute film, creating an illegible stream of words and images. Latham's work is followed by Woodman's Some Disordered Interior Geometries and photographs from that book, and then works by Sophie Calle, Ito Barada, and Tim Rollins in KOS. And these artists present the first grouping of works in the show that demonstrate more playful examples of artists that analyze the knowledge in books by often inserting their own subjectivities into them. So Woodman inserts her own body into a book owned by another, which is then followed by Sophie Calle, Calle's various versions of her The Address Book project. So Calle found a red cover-bound address book on the streets of Paris in 1983, photocopied its contents, mailed the book back to its owner, who she refers to in the book as Pierre D, and then proceeded to contact those addressed within the book to learn about its owner. So over the course of a month, the artist published daily diaristic texts accompanied by images of her encounters with those who agreed to meet with her in the French daily newspaper Libération. So one of the things I really like about Calle's piece is that the technology of the bound address book is really a relic of the past, since it's something she physically found on the streets of Paris. And that's something that has now been replaced by its non-tangible digital form. So it's a work that really would not and could not be made today. The same could not really be said about the address book explored in Ito Barada's The Telephone Books from 2003. The intimacy of the content within this address book is also explored. But here Barada presents a disruption of the language-based system of a telephone directory. So here we see pages from the telephone directory of Barada's illiterate grandmother, who made her own address book out of an old recipe notebook through a coded language of ones and zeros and drawings of figures in order for her to be able to identify her family members. So for Barada's grandmother, the language of Pierre D's ready-made address book that Calle was able to decipher was never a feasible reality. So in using photography to document spreads from the book, Barada's work can be seen as a means to assert the object's importance as a visual record and an alternative tool to navigating the limitations of institutionalized forms of communication. Tim Rollins is another artist who uses art as an alternative tool, specifically for understanding the complexities of literature from the Western canon. In the early 1980s, he developed a way of teaching junior high school students in a disenfranchised community in the South Bronx through the combination of reading and analysis with art making that allowed students to learn how to read and understand literature through the lens of their own experiences. So here you see two prints on view by Tim Rollins and KOS. KOS stands for Kids of Survival, which was the artist collective they ended up forming. And so here they extracted pages from Gustave Flaubert's 19th century novel, The Temptation of St. Anthony, that narrates the moment that the hermit Anthony encounters the devil. In the works, the students create their own shapes of evil by staining the pages with streams and puddles and drops of pigments formed through unconventional tools like medical instruments and straws. So as the show continues, the playful nature of the earlier works become more pointed critiques of books and those who produce them. Clarissa Sly's artist book, which you can see on the screen and which is hanging from the gallery wall, is followed by the artist book, The Holy Bible from 2013, which is made by the artistic duo, Broomberg and Chanarin. Oliver will discuss this project in more detail in a bit, but as an introduction, the Holy Bible traces a history of violence in a facsimile of the King James Version of the Bible by illustrating the text with photographs from the Archive of Modern Conflict, which is the largest collection of vernacular photographs of war. So the artist annotated lines from the text in red ink that function as captions for the unauthored images of lynchings, the Holocaust, the Gulf War, and many other tragedies. So questions of authorship and the dissemination of images is also at the heart of Jill Maggid's The Barragan Library at Zebra from 2021. In this works, Maggid works within the legal parameters surrounding the reproduction of art to be able to use the professional archive of the Mexican architect Luis Barragan. So the professional archive of Luis Barragan is privately owned by the Barragan Foundation, which is based in Switzerland and which has largely barred public access to the materials. So they have full control over the reproduction and the circulation of Barragan's work. So to work around these restrictions, Maggid took 3 books about Barragan. She mounts them on the wall like a ready-made, opens them to photographs of Barragan's homes, all of which were taken by the Mexican photographer Armando Salas Portugal, and attaches wooden frames over the images to comment on what it means for a private institution to own the legacy of an artist, as well as the photographer's work, and the literal limitations of accessing that knowledge. So when it comes to Barragan's professional archive, thorough critical revisitation becomes difficult. The last group of artists in the exhibition build off of what Sly started in the 1980s in highlighting the need for people, specifically those from marginalized groups, to author their own representation, but now really centering these narratives on individuals. Tavares Strawn, his 2018 sculpture Ride Hidden Histories, creates a library out of a selection of books and 1 DVD about the historical figure Sally Ride, who was the first American woman to enter space in 1983. This work is part of Strawn's Hidden Histories project, where he identifies historical figures who have been left out of the encyclopedia and inserts them back into history through his own artwork. The neon sign that reads Ride overlays without entirely obscuring the surname Kepler, which is engraved into the limestone. So Johannes Kepler was a 16th century German astronomer who is known for discovering that the Earth revolves around the sun, a name often inscribed into institutional building pediments and who is certainly not excluded from the encyclopedia. So the last 2 artists in the show are Collier Shore and Tara Cranak, who also add the previously invisible into the art historical canon. In her 2005 work, Jens F., Shore reconstructs the book Andrew White, The Helga Pictures from the 1980s, which is an exhibition catalog that archives the drawings and paintings that Andrew White made of Helga Tesdorf. In her version, Shore collages her photographs of a boy named Jens F., who mimics Tesdorf's poses directly onto the book's original reproductions. So Shore is substituting one identity for another. We have Jens F., a young German living in the countryside, is now taking the place of Tesdorf, who's a woman of German descent living in rural Pennsylvania. So in the pictures, Jens F. Embodies both biological maleness and traditionally feminine representations of women, suggesting a disruption of gender binaries. And so the last body of work in the show is from Tara Cranak's Master Rituals 2 series, where she also addresses questions of identity formation through her reading of Edward Weston's Nudes book from the 1970s. So in a process very similar to Jens F., the artist recreates photographs based on images of Weston's most photographed nude subject, Charisse Wilson. So in Cranak's photographs, her curvy, dark-skinned body replaces Wilson's lean, white body. Yet in contrast to Weston's prints, the author is also the subject, which is emphasized by the coiled black cord in the foreground of each of the photographs, as well as Cranak holding the cable release, which you can see on the image on the right. So like Sly, Cranak uses photography to claim ownership over her own representation as a Peruvian-born woman, an identity that's often excluded or erased from the role of author as well as subject in photography discourse. Cranak and Shore's revisitations of these projects present the history of visual art, as well as books that canonize those histories as aids in the perpetuation of limited representations of people. So all of the works on view in Books Revisited play with and challenge how narrative, historical truths, and knowledge occupy space within and beyond the conceptual boundaries of books to invite viewers to understand books as sites for endless revisitation, whether that be an encyclopedia, an address book, or in our historical catalog. And what I want to stress is that it's an exhibition where historical narratives and counter narratives coexist through visual art to encourage these endless revisitations and reinterpretations. So thank you, Camilo, for guiding us through the exhibition on video. That was great. And now we're going to shift gears slightly and dive deeper into the themes of the show with Oliver Chanarin through his and Adam Broomberg's artist book, The Holy Bible, which I mentioned earlier. And I was really eager to invite Oliver to be part of this conversation because I found both his practice as a whole and the Holy Bible to be a work that really exemplifies the ideas surrounding the show. So I'm going to give a brief introduction to Oliver, and then I'm going to ask him some questions, and we're going to engage in a conversation, and we will also leave some time at the end for any questions that you guys might have. So Oliver Chanarin is an artist who lives in London and who works primarily with photography. His work, though born out of photography and a critical appropriation of photojournalism, culminates in different media, including books, installation, and sculpture. He is one half of the former duo Broomberg and Chanarin with Adam Broomberg, who collaborated together for over 20 years. Broomberg and Chanarin's work is held in major public and private collections, including the Pompidou, Tate, MoMA, Humex, just to name a few. And some of their awards include the 2013 Deutsche Börse Photography Prize for their book War Primer 2 that I think Oliver is going to talk to us a bit about, and the 2014 ICP Infinity Award for Holy Bible. Recent solo projects for Oliver include The Apparatus at SF MoMA, Gravity is the Attraction Between Distant Objects, Part 1 and 2 at Galeria Caracas in Spain. And next year, he has a touring exhibition titled Attention, Desire, Control, of work commissioned and produced for Forma that will first open at the Museum of Making in Derby in the UK and will also be accompanied by a book. So thank you, Oliver, for joining us. I know it's a bit late in London, but it's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you.
Hello.
Hello, and hello to everyone else on the call. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you.
Okay, great.
And hopefully everyone else can too. So
yeah, go ahead.
I was going to just kick off the conversation by first going through the images that I have of the book and then reading the underlined words in red to kind of familiarize or refamiliarize people with this body of work. And then I'm going to allow you to share your screen so you can share a bit more of the book and maybe some other projects as well. So
great, thank you.
And it came to pass in a dream by night. A jealous God, life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, burning for burning, wound for wound, stripe for stripe. His heart is hot. Make merchandise of her. Destroy all the inhabitants of the land from before you, the remnants of giants. She smote off his head, and they cried. There was war, and there they left their images. As is the mother, so is her daughter. The dog is turned to his own vomit again. The spirit of truth and the spirit of error, the spirit that beareth witness. So now I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I'm going to let Oliver, you can share your screen and then we can continue the conversation.
Right. So, hi everybody. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. So thank you for inviting me to join this conversation. It's actually been really wonderful hearing about the show from you directly. Sometimes it's quite hard to figure out things online, you know, when you're at a distance, you can't actually go and visit and see these objects. So your introduction was really insightful, so thank you. And yeah, I'm in London. I'm sitting in my darkroom at the moment because I'm in the middle of printing a new show. So I'm surrounded by test strips and all sorts of photographs that I'm printing over here. And I think the fact that I'm in a darkroom printing physical objects is really significant for this conversation, because photographs are objects and books are objects, and there's something about the physicality of a book which is undeniable and so important. But I think we should also at some point talk about what's next, what comes after the book, because we live in a digital age, and how does a book function in a non-physical sense. So let's talk about that later. But maybe I'll just start by saying that Holy Bible, the only way that we were able to make that book was to have copyright permission from the Queen of England. I don't know if you knew that, but when we decided that we wanted to reproduce the King James Bible, we went to look around to see, you know, our assumption was that this was something that we could just, you know, just print, that presumably it's hundreds of years old, it's out of copyright, but that's not true. It's actually owned by the Queen. So yeah, so the first thing we did is we wrote a letter to Cambridge Press, who manage the copyright of the Bible on behalf of the Queen. And it took about a year, and eventually we got a letter back from them saying that the Queen does not object to our project. It was this like very perfectly worded letter that it wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no.
Right.
But we took that as a let's go for it. And so we began, yeah, but I'm gonna share my screen with you because I want to show you where this project, how the kind of genesis of the project. And to do that, I'm going to try and share my screen. It's not actually letting me. Host disabled participant sharing screen.
Let's see.
I'm unable to share screen.
Hold on, let's see.
You can share now.
Okay, great.
There we go.
So yeah, so this is, and I need to just make this full size. Yeah.
There we go.
So
Perfect.
this, yeah, so the project, the Holy Bible, really, I mean, just to explain the object, you saw it in your tour, but it's a book that really looks exactly like the kind of Bible that you'd find in a motel room, in the drawer of the bedside table. It's identical in feel. It's got a kind of fake leather cover, and the text Holy Bible is embossed in gold. And the edges of the book are not straight. They've got this kind of curve to them. And the pages, when you open it, it's incredibly thin paper. And actually that's a testament to Michael Mack, who produced the book, who went to incredible lengths to find just that right paper that was Bible paper, that was so thin that it felt like a Bible, but that you could still print photographs onto it without getting too much show through. So in a way, technically, it was a very, very difficult and complicated book to make. And it was essential that when you picked up the object, you felt like you were holding a Bible. But then when you opened it, you suddenly had this kind of horror, that realization that it was actually something else. And there's a kind of sense of alienation that happens when you open the book. And that was very important. And it's very technical. And it's really to do with the binding and the material and the paper stock and all these things that all kind of add up to the kind of concept of the book. Because a book is not just an object, it's an idea. And everything needs to be in line. And in this case, it somehow was. But the project began several years before we produced it, when we went to Berlin to visit the Bertolt Brecht archive. And we were very interested in Brecht because he had made a book in 1955 called War Primer. And War Primer was a kind of analysis of the relationship between words and images, but he was dealing with images of the Second World War. And what Brecht did was he cut out newspaper articles all the way through the Second World War. And as a way of trying to understand the images that he was looking at, and also to kind of complicate the meaning of the images, he would write a poem, what he called a quatrain, which was like he called it a photo epigram, which was a poem and a picture that came together to create another meaning. And our idea was to take this book, War Primer, and to make a sequel, a bit like a kind of Hollywood sequel, kind of, Spider-Man 2, to make War Primer 2, whereas the original War Primer dealt with images and the Second World War. Our War Primer dealt with the period that we were living through at the time, which was the war in Iraq and Afghanistan, of course, the so-called war on terror. And so we tried various ways of doing this kind of reply to the book, including trying to write our own poems that were pretty bad. And then we ended up coming up with just this very simple idea of sticking screenshots from the war on terror over into the original book, and trying to create relationships between these new images and the original poems. I'm sure you can't read that on the page, but I'll read it to you. So Brecht's poem read, the original image was a photograph, an aerial photograph of Liverpool being bombed by the German aerial bombardment. And the poem reads, "A cloud of smoke told us they were here. They were the sons of fire, not of the light. They came from where? They came out of the darkness. Where did they go? Into eternal night." And it just, the minute we put that picture there with that poem, it was so immediately made sense. And his poems, Brecht's poems, were so prescient, and they just seemed to resonate with these contemporary images. So in such a kind of frightening way. And we began this process of sticking in these pictures into the book. And that was how we made War Primer 2. And I'll just show you a few pages of that. But when we went to visit the archive, the curators there showed us this extraordinary object, which was Brecht's Bible. And Brecht had a copy of the Bible that he kind of treasured and he carried with him wherever he went. It wasn't a religious interest in the object. What he did was he was cutting out newspaper articles just like he was doing for the War Primer, and he was putting them into the pages of the Bible. He stuck a photograph, if I remember correctly, it was a photograph of a racing car from Time magazine that he stuck on the cover. And inside the pages there were notations, there were calculations, there were measurements, he kind of used this book just as an object that he could take notes into. And so inspired by that, we set out to make this book Holy Bible. Holy Bible. And we then got permission from the Queen. And then we thought, well, what are we going to put in this Bible? What images are we going to put in this Bible? And that was when we went to talk to an organization called the Archive of Modern Conflict in London. And we made the proposal that we would make a catalogue of their entire collection, using it to illustrate the Bible, and they said yes, and the rest is history. So then we began the process. So I want to show you this picture. Can you see this image, everyone? This is an installation of the work in an exhibition form. And maybe when we get to questions, maybe we can talk a little bit about the difference between making a book and doing something that goes on the walls of a gallery. But interestingly, the book that we made, the Holy Bible, it actually started off not as a book really, but more like a collage that was on the wall. So we tore out the pages of the Bible and we stuck them on the wall. We got the pictures and we printed them and we stuck them with pins onto the pages. And we moved these around until the work started to take shape, and what we ended up doing was gathering all of the chapters together as framed works, and the pictures were inside them. So it really was a book that began on the wall as something quite horizontal, kind of in plan rather than in elevation, if you think of architectural terms.
Right.
And some of the pictures were obviously too high to see, so we put these beautiful red ladders into the gallery so that people could scrutinize the texts and look at the images and start to create these relationships.
And Oliver, how did you go about deciding which 500 plus images to use from the Archive of Modern Conflict and which 700 plus pages to illustrate, and also which lines to underline?
It was very instinctive, really. I mean, there's a kind of conceptual idea, and then there's the reality. And in reality, there's always taste and sentiment and preference kind of comes into the process. So once we had pasted all these pictures up on all these pages up on the wall, we started just standing in the room, underlining text that we were interested in. So it kind of started with the words first. And then we would go every week, spend a day or two in the archive, and we took photographs of pictures on our mobile phones. And we created this huge low-res database of all the images. And then we started just sort of printing them out and sticking them on and trying them out and experimenting with, how does this picture work with this text? That doesn't work. That feels too silly. That feels too jokey. That feels too serious, and we're trying to feel out what the right tone of the book needed to be, because we didn't know. The strange thing about the Archive of Modern Conflict is that it's not, when you think of an archive, you think of something that's kind of dead or something that's contained, whereas this archive is very, very alive. And it was the curators of the archive were constantly expanding the archive daily. They were buying things on auctions all the time. And so every day we would go in there and we would, go through file after box after box off the shelf, and there would be a ring on the door and there would be a courier, FedEx. They arrived with like 700 suitcases full of photographs from the Second World War. So, it was this kind of enormous, uncontrollable object that we could never really get our head around the whole thing.
It seems too that it's kind of a fitting archive for this project because they both are these unofficial versions of sorts. And I also wondered if you could talk a bit about the content of the archive itself, because from my understanding, it's a little bit unconventional. I mean, kind of the tagline is images of war, but it contains much more than that, which we then end up seeing in the Holy Bible Project.
It's more akin to a kind of cabinet of curiosity, I'd say. It's like a kind of a photographic version of a Victorian museum. It's broadly, very loosely framed by the title, An Archive of Modern Conflict. But then conflict is not just limited to the theater of war. I mean, there's domestic violence, there's all sorts of conflicts going on in our everyday experiences. So they delve into pretty much anything that you can imagine they're interested in. It's so broad that it is in danger of sort of being kind of boundless. And like in Revelations, you find that quite a lot of the images are pornographic. There's a lot of pornography, there's a lot of violence, it's really a very disturbing archive. There's in particular, there's one collection of photographs taken and books made by Nazi soldiers during the Second World War that were really, really astonishing, because they showed something that we're not really supposed to look at in relation to the Holocaust, and that is soldiers having fun. These pictures of Nazi soldiers behind the front line, playing football, hugging their children, having a good time. And there's something very disturbing about these particular pictures that don't marry up with the narrative that we have about the Holocaust. But a place like the Archive of Modern Conflict is interested in those types of images that don't fit. And so it really was a really suitable place to make this book.
And so an excerpt of a text by the Israeli philosopher Adi Ofer titled Divine Violence is printed at the back of the book. And
Right.
the text is fitting as a conclusion to your project in that the essay argues that the Bible is a proponent of state-sanctioned violence through God asserting his power through acts of catastrophe. And this is an argument that the images, together with their underlined captions, are supported in your version of the Bible. So I wondered if you could describe a bit how you came across Ofer's writing and how it serves as at least one framework in which to perceive the project as a whole.
So we were introduced to Adi Ofer's work through Eyal Weitzman at Forensic Architecture, who's a dear friend of both of ours. And when we started to read his work about the Bible, it really resonated with our interest, because in our photographic practice, we've had this sort of interest, we had this interest from the very beginning in the power dynamic that exists between the camera and the sitter. This kind of dynamic, this kind of uncomfortable flow of power between the camera and the witness, essentially. What it means to be a witness. And one of the other kind of themes of our practice was looking at the relationship between the individual in the context of the institution. So I actually have, in this presentation, I have to skip through it all the way to the beginning, but I wanted to show you the first picture that we ever did together, which is a photograph of a woman under anesthetic at Guy's Hospital. And we went to great lengths to take this picture, getting permission from the hospital, getting permission from obviously the doctors and the person in the picture. But when we finally said to this lady, we're going to take a photograph of you under anesthetic, is that okay? She said, yes, that's fine. And she signed her release form, and we went into the operation and photographed her. And even though we had kind of done all our due diligence, it still felt very, very uncomfortable. And we really started to wonder about this relationship between this individual and this institution of the hospital. And we did this for about 3 months. And one of the really surprising things was that not a single patient said no to us. And we couldn't really understand that. And then we realized that it was because they just saw us as somehow part of the institution. And when you're sick and you're vulnerable, you go into a hospital, you sort of give up a bit of your autonomy to this institution. And so this idea of this picture sort of encapsulates notions around the individual in relationship to the institution, but also the idea of privacy. And I think when you look at this picture, you realize how our ideas about privacy and the institution have changed so radically in the last 20 years. I mean, we live on a different planet in that respect. I think if you went and tried to make this picture now, you never would get into a hospital to do it in the first place. But if you did, 90% of the people would say no, because there is such a suspicion and an anxiety about image production. So our relationship to images has changed, radically over the years since I became a photographer. And circling back to Adi Ofer and the Bible, he was very interested in this relationship between the citizen and the government, and how governments exert control over the individual. And he looks at a lot of examples where governments use catastrophe as a sort of weapon to assert authority. And he traces this theme back to the Old Testament. and the way that God punishes through violence. Actually, if you read the Bible, it is so violent. And, you know, one of the things that really struck me working on this project and looking at the pictures is how violent the words are. And actually, why is it that we find it difficult to look at violent pictures, but somehow violent words are a little bit easier? And I've never really understood that.
Right. And images of violence are, you know, the images that we're seeing in the book, you know, it was made over a decade ago, but those images are similar to the images that we're seeing every day now on our screens and in the media. And what people often say, images that we've become numb to almost. And those are the same images that we are more or less seeing in your version of the Holy Bible. But when you look at your project, you're almost resensitized to those images. And so I wondered if in the act of superimposing images of catastrophe onto the Bible, there was an attempt to resensitize us to images that maybe we become numb to due to the inundation of these images in the media.
Look, I think that there's something happening. I'm just trying to get to the Holy Bible. There's something that happens in the book that happens in a lot of the projects that you presented today, which is a kind of collision of material. You've got the book, the original book, and then you've got this layer over the top, which you see again and again, this kind of, this method of creating juxtaposition that is very, very effective. And I think what we were interested in was the way that these two different types of material kind of collided and created some kind of new meaning often through very accidental connections between different images and different words. And I think that might be what's going on in a lot of the works that are in the show. But I'm interested to know what you think. But for me, it's the chance encounter of these different materials that create a kind of tension. Sometimes there's a harmony between them. Other times they kind of rub against each other and create a kind of fiction. But one of the appeals of hijacking a book as an object and making an artwork is this kind of automatic and accidental relationship between conflicting material. And I think that that's probably one of the things that you see again and again with all of those projects.
Right. It's definitely this connection between the power of words, which in the case of your project would be the power of the Bible's words. And then the power of words with the power of images, which in this case would be images of war. I wondered if you could touch on a bit, because yes, this is a large theme and artists address them in different ways, but the combination of how maybe this book is challenging the combination between words and images, how sometimes they're, as you were saying, when they're compatible, they have a great effect. And then maybe when they're incompatible, it's perhaps showing that sometimes that there are no words to describe images.
I mean, some of the images that are in the archive really are beyond words, that's for sure. I'm just trying to think how to respond to your question. I'm going to show something else.
We lost
Hold
your screen sharing.
Oh, okay. 1 second. Can you see that?
Yeah.
I'm just going to put that on while we're talking. I'll do it like that. Is that still visible?
Not quite yet.
Oh,
here we go. Yes.
Because you and I met quite a while ago, didn't we? While you were working on Mirror with a Memory.
Correct.
Which was a fantastic project. And was kind of looking at images in the age of the algorithm broadly, should we say.
Yeah.
And I found it really, really fascinating. And at the time, I was thinking a lot about automation and about the book object and, you know, what it means to make a physical book in the time of the algorithm. A book is such an old-fashioned way of looking at images. You know, you pick it up and you scroll through it and you flip through it, and you know, you can't click on anything and you can't jump to anything. It's very basic. But I was thinking it's a bit like a warehouse, you know, it's a bit like you walk into a room and everything is on shelves, and you walk through the room and you pick things off the shelves. And I was just thinking about that. And I had the chance to go to one of these fulfillment centers where they, you know, when you buy something online at Amazon, or in England, we have like a company that delivers your food from your, you know, to your food that you buy from a supermarket. And I had this amazing experience going to visit one of these factories where they literally, you know, they've reinvented the warehouse in a way. They've taken away shelves completely, and they've created these stacks. And I was thinking about how could I bring the language of that factory, this kind of fulfillment center factory aesthetic, into an art gallery environment, into a gallery context. And as I started building this machine, which, as you can see, is able to mine stacks of photographs and put them on the wall and take other pictures off, and is responding algorithmically to the attention that people are giving to the pictures in the room, I started to think about this thing as a book, where you can't physically touch the pages, but the pages are being turned for you algorithmically. And I thought it might be, this is kind of my very rudimentary kind of attempt of thinking through a book in space. It's kind of like, oh, that thing's empty. And I thought maybe that could be an interesting point of discussion for talking to some of the other people on the call.
Yeah, no, I'm glad that you brought up that project, because the Holy Bible was made a decade ago, right? And so in the past decade, technology has drastically advanced, particularly when it comes to images of war. I'm thinking specifically about drone imagery and images made without human involvement. And I also wondered too, like, if revisiting this project today added any new layers to your original reading of the project.
It's interesting you asked that, because I haven't looked at the book for a while. It's like when you make something, you spend a lot of time thinking about it, talking about it, writing about it. And then, you know, I haven't looked at it for a few years, to be honest. And I found that so it's been quite a nice invitation to come and talk about it here tonight and kind of reflect on it. This is a bit of a joke, but it's actually a really brilliant book to have in the toilet, because that is where you can really sit with it and kind of drill down into these kind of strange connections between words and images. But what I found looking at it is that the meanings are constantly shifting and changing. And they're very kind of driven by how you're feeling, how I'm feeling in the moment. And I think that it is open to multiple and various readings depending on who you are and, you know, what's going on at the time of reading.
Right. And I think actually that's a good place to wrap up and maybe ask people for questions, because I guess one of the main themes of the show is that the reader is the author, you know, which is this very post-structuralist line of thinking, but authorship is definitely at play, and questions of authorship are at play in this project. You know, you're choosing a Bible that's unauthored, or seamlessly unauthored, even though we know that it's authored by numerous individuals. The images, even though some of these images are well-known photographs by photographers like Matthew Brady, Lee Miller, that they're unauthored, they're uncredited. The text becomes pulled in different directions. And so the reader is really tasked with navigating the book and forming their own connections. And they might come to this project with their own preconceived notions regarding the language of the Bible, or their relationship with an event of an iconic image, or their relationship with a specific image through art history. So I think that's a good place to open up the conversation.
If there is anybody on this call who would like to speak, or has a question, or even has just a thought, or wants to speak about their relationship to this object of the Bible, which, as you say, is something that I think everybody feels that belongs to them in some way, I'd really love to hear from you. So is there anyone who would like to participate? I think the thing about these forums is it's very easy to just sit there and listen. And yeah, any thoughts from the...
If there are no thoughts about that, I can kind of ask a concluding question that, you know, Books Revisited is a presentation of works that ask questions. And perhaps you can say that about a lot of artwork. You know, it's not a show that's proposing answers. So,
well, we are all just living in the question.
And I certainly like to ask them. And I wondered, though, what does presenting a project like this, a very, you know, it's not an easy project. What does it mean to present it in an art context? What does it allow? What can you do by presenting a work like this in an art context that maybe a journalistic context would not allow, even if you're maybe asking the same question?
Yeah, it's a really good. Oh, that's a good question. Yeah, who's got their hand up? Yeah, David Solo.
Hello.
Hi, David. How's it going?
Really well.
Right.
And yourself?
Really well. Yeah, it's quite late here. I'm in London. There's no heating in this room, so it's not very warm. But what are your thoughts?
Well, as opposed to my sort of relation with the Bible, I was more interested in following up about experiences at the archive, and kind of wondering, given how random and serendipitous exploring it can be, you know, whether, or sort of how much as you went through this, you found yourselves potentially looking for particular kinds of images versus perhaps, you know, just seeing what you encountered. You know, so my experience of trying to find things there, you know, is one of seldom finding what I was looking for, but often finding things that were even more interesting.
Yeah. Well, there was definitely, you know, a meandering quality to it. It felt a little bit like street photography, you know, where you're hunting for something, but you don't know what you're looking for, in a way. And then as certain pages feel like they're coming together, like this image works with this text, oh, that feels good, that feels nice, then a sort of tone begins to emerge. And what was quite interesting was each chapter of the Bible started to take on a character of its own. Obviously, some of the chapters are very long. Some of them are only like a couple of pages long. And so that immediately created a different tempo and a different pace, and called for different kinds of images. But for example, a chapter like Psalms, if you read it, if you go back and read Psalms, it's very, very poetic. And there is this sort of obsessive reference to the self. it's me, it's my body, my blood, my bones, my world, my this, my that. It's just this. It's actually very unlike a lot of the Bible in its self-referential quality. And so that particular chapter asked for different kinds of images, and we kind of went looking for them. I don't know if that answers your question, but I think as the project began to take shape, we felt, okay, we've got a little bit too much of the Holocaust now. I think we better stay away from that. Let's have a bit of this, you know. And there was a process of trying to create a balance and tell a story and a narrative that didn't feel too weighted in one direction.
I think that does. Thank you.
Does that tally with your experience, David, of working in archives?
Well, this archive in particular, so the Archive of Modern Conflict in particular, where I've sort of been searching for things, but with again, sort of more unpredictable results. And so it was sort of dealing with their perhaps lack of organizational structure and kind of how how that fed back into what ended up in the book was what I was curious about.
I sympathize.
Well,
it's really nice hearing from other people in the group. Does anybody else have any thoughts? Any hands? No.
Just one more question. Were you tempted, as part of the project to write, as opposed to sort of found or text you selected, of adding your own writing?
I've always had that desire, but I've never found my writing to be good enough. Like I said, with the War Primer 2, we did try and, we tried to say, okay, let's write our own poems and put them with contemporary images. But they weren't good enough, or there was something very nice about the collision of the old and the new and the disparate voices. Maybe it's to do with the fact that Adam and I were collaborating. There were two of us. There was this feeling that the author was somehow anonymous, you might say, or, when you work collaboratively, there's less authorship. And so writing collaboratively maybe felt too difficult. Yeah.
Okay, well, we're 5 minutes over the hour, and I know it's creeping and getting late for you, Oliver. So I think this might be a good place to stop. I want to thank everyone for coming, and Oliver for taking the time to speak with us about your project and projects. And I'm looking forward to seeing where this big touring exhibition goes. So thank you all. And just a reminder that the show is open until Saturday. So there's a few more days to see the exhibition in person if you find yourself in New York. And thank you.
Lovely. Thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure. See you.